Hello, everybody. 2021 certainly was a year, and while I'm not necessarily doing my top 10 movies of this year, I'm actually going to be doing sort of a potpourri review of all the things I engaged with that really spoke to me. So beyond just talking about movies, I'm also going to be talking a little bit about TV, a little bit about video games, and also some personal things that have happened with me. I'm going to intersperse the personal stuff between movies, TV, and games, and I'll be addressing them in that order. But we'll start with a personal one. Oh, and don't expect anything fun happening back here. This is more just a comfortable space as opposed to showing you unflattering angles of my room. Also, it is worth noting that all the media that I'm going to be discussing didn't necessarily come out specifically this year. So while it's not necessarily new, it is new to me. But enough preamble, let's get into the first bit of personal news. Zach and I produced a comic. So if you're familiar with the obituary cartoon pilot that Zach and I produced like 5 years ago, a lot of you have asked, like, why haven't you made more? Well, we wish that animation weren't so goddamn expensive. And while we did manage to get to pitch at Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and Disney and Nickelodeon even a second time, it didn't get picked up, but we're still, pitching around, and we just really wanted to tell these stories. So Zach has been drawing all of them. I've been coloring all of them. And you can read them on Webtoon or on Tapas or our website, but this contains like the 6 full kind of comic episodes that you can physically hold, which is really, really cool. There are only about, I think, a little less than 100 signed ones. So if you want one of those, obituarycartoon.com/shop, make that selection before they disappear, because Zach lives in Boston and we don't see one another that often. So if Zach doesn't come here or I don't bring a ton of comics to her, like, what are you gonna do? Obviously, animation is something that is near and dear to my heart, and this year, I watched a fair amount of animated features that really spoke to me. I absolutely adore what Sony Pictures Animation is doing in terms of just pushing the medium forward. For those unfamiliar, they're the folks that did SpiderVerse, and this year they did The Mitchells versus the Machines, which is just a fun, colorful family romp. It's the story of Katie, a girl who wants to, she's a little outlandish, she's a little artistic, and her parents decide to go on a road trip to get her to college. And in the midst of this, AI basically takes over the world and starts enslaving humans. The comedy is really strong, the characters are quite fun, but guys, the animation. Sony Pictures Animation just managed to amp the style up even farther than Spider-Verse, and I'm also very excited for Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, which I just appreciate the fact that they had the balls and brazen attitude to go, hey, we're telling a really awesome and compelling story, and we're doing so in incredibly inventive ways with the medium. We're doubling down. We're making this a part 1. When has there been a part 1 for an animated feature? I ask you that. You can leave an answer in the comments down below. I also was excited to watch so many different anime films this year. I watched Lupin the Third, The Castle of Cagliostro, which I hadn't seen any Lupin the Third, but I was just delighted by all the sharp animation, the goofy comedy. And then I dipped into a lot of, teen anime, because I watched Ride Your Wave, which has a really unique concept of sort of a girl working through the grief of her boyfriend who she can only see in water. It takes some weird twists and turns, but it's really touching and effective. The same is true with A Silent Voice, which is about a kind of an asshole who teases a deaf girl, and they're sort of crisscrossing and his kind of atonement for being such a jerk. Jumping from animation, but continuing in the space of sound, I also watched The Sound of Metal, which Riz Ahmed is absolutely incredible in. It tells this awesome story of a metal band drummer who begins to lose his hearing, and it's such an impressive look at not just what it means to have the thing taken away from you, but it also deals with addiction in really interesting ways. It approaches the notion of like what happens when a person hangs their hat on one particular thing being the solution to their quote unquote problems. And unsurprisingly, the sound design is fucking incredible throughout the whole viewing experience, which, yes, I wasn't so fortunate to see it in theaters because a pandemic and quarantine. But even on my rinky-dink sound system at home, Sound of Metal is a technical and narrative triumph. Also, in terms of just like being inventive, as I'm sure you're aware, I'm a musical theater nerd. So this year was great with, Tick, Tick, Boom, In the Heights, and we kind of closed off the year with West Side Story. West Side Story is a particularly close one for me, as it was one of the first musicals that I did in high school, so I know that musical backwards and forwards. And yes, there was a part of me that was worried that not so much Spielberg would be like erasing the classic, because I don't really care about that. I feel if the story is good, the story can be retold and presented in new and invigorating ways. And honest to goodness, Spielberg is a perfect case of doing exactly that. Just like the way Romeo and Juliet has been told many, many different times, Spielberg tells West Side Story his way. It's unsurprisingly beautifully shot, but Spielberg also manages to deepen and enrich a lot of characters. These changes manage to only elevate the story. However, the best change made to West Side Story is what Spielberg does with Cool. Now, for those unfamiliar, Cool is a song that is either sung before the Rumble by Riff or after the Rumble by Ice, depending on whether it's in the movie or the play. I forget, honestly, which is associated with which. And Spielberg shuffled it up again and actually makes the song sung not by Riff, but by Tony, and it's to Riff, not Action. Action's one of the Jet names. All the Jets have stupid, nicknames. I was Mouthpiece. So in this Spielberg version of West Side Story, Cool is recontextualized to Tony basically telling Riff, hey, don't be hot-headed, keep it cool, don't go after the sharks. And then it becomes this kind of moment of betrayal in their friendship through the whole thing where the Jets more or less abandon Tony and sort of drives this further desperation through all of that. So that was really fun. I didn't necessarily feel all of it stuck the landing, but I think that what Spielberg managed to do in enriching a lot of these characters, Bernardo in particular, Riff, the relationship between Riff and Tony, was really exceptional, and also leaning into the fantastical magic of a musical was really, really nice. Also, in terms of revisiting classics, is The Matrix Resurrections. Now, I hadn't actually rewatched The Matrix or any of its subsequent sequels in probably since, Reloaded and Revolutions I hadn't seen since I saw them in theaters when I was a kid. And The Matrix actually is a strange one where I didn't see it in full until I was in my mid-20s. But it was very interesting to rewatch all of them and watch the Animatrix for the first time in lead up to Resurrections. One thing that struck me about the original Matrix is goddamn if it doesn't clip along the whole time. Every line of dialogue is purposeful and just layered to perfection, which upon my first viewing of it, I felt like it plodded along a little bit. I just don't understand why I had such a recollection of it. I also found myself really enjoying a lot of what Reloaded had to offer, a lot more, although admittedly, when I first saw Reloaded, I didn't have a full picture of The Matrix. And then Revolution, obviously, the weakest of the original trilogy set, but it's still doing some creative stuff. Now, Resurrections, yes, I'm going to skip over Animatrix because it's such a unique hodgepodge of things. I hope you'll forgive me. Resurrections is so... There's a lot, and I don't think I've fully digested it, but I do appreciate the hell out of Lana speaking so directly to sort of a fanboyism and a corporatization around The Matrix. I don't necessarily think that it has the best action, probably out of the 4 films now. I do like, however, how it manages to recontextualize what has been or should be seen as important within the Matrix framework. And I think a lot of the ideas that are presented about what makes humanity worth fighting for, an interesting one. I love the dynamic that is created and warped of Neo and Trinity. I think that the modal version of Morpheus and the reimagining of Agent Smith don't necessarily land 100%. I'd been reading that Lana had wanted to revisit the Matrix predominantly as she'd been working through a lot of grief with the loss of her parents. And so I was expecting that something with Morpheus being a reconstructed memory through the lens of Neo, we'd be looking at grief through that. And we don't really, which is a bit disappointing. I wanted a little bit more from that, and Smith, I just was like, I don't understand your motivations. But again, these are movies that sometimes require a little more thorough digging, I feel. And then also as a just fun realization, this is the 7th Matrix that's been constructed by the machines, and the comment made by a character is that they've found that anguish generates more energy, which I then realized, oh, this is Monsters, Inc. They've built this Matrix is Monsters, Inc., which just, it was an amusing realization to me. I suppose also talking in the action genre, if you haven't heard of or seen Bahubali, which is an Indian 2-part saga, it's very hard to explain because it ends in a flashback and then starts in a flashback, and there's a whole multi-generational saga of 2 warring brothers and betrayal and love, and there's a lot. And it also, being an Indian film, is Bollywood, so you've got some awesome performance pieces. It's not going to be on a visual level of like Star Wars or anything like that, but it is still an absolute treat, and some of the action is just, it's bonkers. It is bonkers, you guys. Also, equally bonkers was the movie that I have been wanting to see for so long, because the box on the DVD that I would walk by countless times at Borders bookstore, yeah, remember that old gem, would always grab me. And that's the Japanese movie from, I believe it's 1977, House. House is great because it is like a classic schlocky B-movie, but wrapped up in like the best of intentions. And it is so fun from start to finish. You've got your Japanese schoolgirls, they all have these specific names that sort of play out into what their foibles are, and what ultimately will be their undoing, because over the course of the movie, they're all going to die. But it's done with such wildly visually exciting and experimental trickery that you're just delighted the whole time. I forget the director's name, but I know that he was a commercial and music video director, I believe, so he was just accustomed to doing the outlandish and seeing if it works, and I feel it works 100%. If you can see House, see it. In closing this list out of however many movies I've just talked about, I'm going to mention His Girl Friday, which I'd never seen before, and god damn it, it is so sharp and witty. It's from 1941, but the thing just, like, is so progressive for the time, and so zippy and zingy and clever. Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant have such incredible chemistry in His Girl Friday. It is just this absolutely magnetic roller coaster ride that once you're in, you're so locked and loaded. And it's just the two of them really bickering and tricking and fooling one another into what can be best described as a toxic relationship. And yet, you're delighted by it the whole time. So yes, those were a potpourri of the movies that I saw this year. I felt like I've got some loose thoughts on them that like feel like I should just get those out into the ether. So ether, enjoy. Leave positive or negative comments on any of what I described in the comments down below. But back to another short personal bit of Yay for Michael. You might be unaware, but I am an avid hiker. I love nature. I grew up going to national parks all the time with my family, and not being able to travel so much, courtesy of quarantine and the pandemic, has definitely weighed on me. However, in August, when things were, experiencing a bit of a dip, I managed to make it out to Mineral King with my family. Zach even flew out from Boston, which was actually when we signed a lot of the comics that you can pick up in obituarycartoon.com/shop. And while up in the Mineral King area, I also met up with one of my dear friends, Nina, and we went on a hike. Initially, we were thinking we were going to maybe do like a backpacking excursion, but we're like, no, we haven't hiked in a while, so let's be conservative on what we're doing, but let's try to push ourselves a little bit. And we hiked around the Los Gatos area, specifically on part of the Skyline to the Sea Trail for those familiar with the Northern California hiking circuits. We started the trail at 7 in the morning and we were feeling really good, and so we just kept kind of adding little offshoots to our hiking trail, and we wound up doing almost 20 miles. I think our total step count was 40,000 or some insane thing like that, but it was 19.7 miles or something, which I've never done in my life. Zach and I went backpacking in Peru, and I think the most we did on any of those days was 15 or something like that. But it was so nice to be immersed in nature. It was so nice to hike as long as we did, and we didn't come back feeling that bad. We just felt invigorated and energized. And if any of you have the opportunity to get out in nature, I will always encourage you to do so. But enough of me jibber-jabbering about positive outdoor nature stuff. Let's get back inside and talk about TV. Because guys, TV has been great. Speaking of great, have any of you been watching Hulu's The Great? What a transition. Good job, Michael. For those who are unfamiliar, The Great is the story of Catherine the Great of Russia and her strange relationship with her husband, Peter III. Catherine is played by Elle Fanning, and Peter is played by Nicholas Hoult. And this is written by Tony McNamara, who wrote The Favorite, and it is in the same comedic style as The Favorite, in it is a historical period piece, yes, but everybody speaks with the colloquial eloquence of the present. And it is so fucking nuanced and thorough in its complications and its characters. And especially in season 2, they really step up how convoluted the web of the Russian court can really get, because everything is just on the precipice of collapse. And you're just watching Catherine and Peter kind of navigating this recently couped Russia and their feelings towards one another while she's pregnant, and there's the Ottomans who are knocking on the door. It is so remarkably impressive from top to bottom. I can't speak more highly of this comedy. And honestly am shocked that I haven't heard really any of my friends talking about how great it is. So if you're looking for a period piece that does not take itself too seriously at all, I would 100% encourage you to check out The Great. Another comedy that is very strong, but I think a little more well-established and known to many, is Ted Lasso. Further entrenching the characters in the fun world of the UK football scene, Jason Sudeikis is just a delight. Really, the entire cast is strong, much as the case with The Great and all of these larger ensemble pieces. I think, however, the thing that just makes Ted Lasso stand out is it manages to be a warm, buttery hug with every episode, even when things can kind of be a little sad and real. And then here, another fun comedy for you all, is a real twist, but still staying in England. If you haven't heard of Taskmaster, the panel show, Jesus Christ, stop what you're doing and watch it. It is on YouTube. You don't need an Apple Plus subscription. You don't need Hulu. You don't need Disney Plus. It's on YouTube. Just about all of the episodes are available. What is Taskmaster? Look, I've been wanting to do a full breakdown of this show's brilliance for a while. I'll give you the most bare bones thing, and if some people are like, I want you to talk more about Taskmaster, I'll talk about Taskmaster. Tell me in the comments if you want me to talk about Taskmaster, because I fucking will. Taskmaster is the premise of you have 5 comedians and they are assigned tasks. I know, that sounds so incredibly simple. And the tasks are usually incredibly simple, like eat as much melon as you can in a minute. The most melon eaten wins. But then you have less objective and more subjective tasks like make a dinosaur using this photocopier. This is when the show just becomes something that is truly great, because all of the comedians are then going to have to reflect on why they did what they did while watching all of it back, edited in magnificent glory. It is some of the deepest and hardest I have laughed, certainly over the pandemic. I bullet trained through just about all of it. And this isn't a call out for like a VPN or service or anything like that, because NordVPN, nobody pays me to say anything. Except remember when MoviePass like told me to do stuff before MoviePass was like really big and then went bankrupt? Anyway, if you have a VPN, you can sign into the Netherlands and watch even the most recent series on their YouTube channel. So like Series 11 and Series 12, both of which are exceptional, are available, and all you literally need to do is sign your VPN to the Netherlands and bingo bango, you're in. But I feel like they've got at least the past like 10 most recent series, and you have so much content. Watch Taskmaster. I haven't even spoken to like the Greg and Alex bits of the everything about it is great. Watch the show. And finally, let's close out with Squid Game. Yes, I know everybody got on the Squid Game train, but I feel like I just need to speak a little bit on it because, guys, Squid Game used every part of the buffalo and ratcheted itself up so meticulously in such magnificent ways and complicated itself more than it needed to, especially for a first season show that was not intended to be a show. It was supposed to be just a survival games movie that then became adapted into a show. Like the cop and doctor storylines were secondary added things once this was adapted to series, which is utterly insane because I feel like it's pivotal to showing the inner workings and further complicating and making the plot as compelling as it is. But I just love everything that the show manages to do. The fact that it introduces so many rules and immediately shows you the payoffs of the repercussions of those rules and speaks to the notion of choice. It's fun that like two of the most hotly anticipated and like one of the hottest things being like Matrix Resurrections and then Squid Game speaks so much to the illusion of choice and how important humans cling to the idea of choice. So yeah, that's TV for me, but I didn't just watch TV and movies and hike and make a comic. I also, and this one feels very good to say, I read a lot more this year, which admittedly, more is the operative word here because I really haven't been reading a ton, but it felt very nice to re-engage with a book in a really meaningful way. I read The Book of Two Ways, which I loved. To give you like the super SparkNotesy iteration of it, it's about a death doula who comes from a background of Egyptology, which sounds like so bizarre, but my friend told me about it, and all she needed to say was death doula, and I was immediately in. I've always been fascinated with Egyptian culture, which was like an added cherry on top to the whole thing, but I'm also uniquely interested in how cultures perceive death, and so to be following a death doula, also in Egyptology, which obviously is very entrenched in death, was a really interesting read that kind of manages to percolate into something a lot more interesting as you read along. Another book that I thoroughly enjoyed was I read a collection of short stories by N.K. Jemisin, which then prompted me to start reading the 5th season, which is her trilogy of, I think it's the Broken Earth trilogy, is what it's called. I read The Haunting of Hill House, which I expected to be a lot more scary than it was. It definitely leans more on just kind of like fantastical spooky than outright scary. Just these moments of like a character who is clearly possessed in some way, like holding a flower and watching it die and thinking nothing of it. And you're like, oh, that's an unsettling bit of imagery, but nothing so horrific that I ever was like, as I was reading. But beyond the more classic novel reading, I also have been reading a little bit of manga. And by a little bit, I mean one series, The Girl from the Other Side, which caught my eye just by its visual. It's really striking in terms of its like character and creature and just framing of shots. The story follows a little girl, Shiva, and her caretaker, teacher, who's a creature of sorts, because in this world, while it seems kind of medieval time period, there's been some sort of curse that's been laid across the land, and anybody who touches somebody who is cursed then themselves become cursed, and they lose their memories, become a little animalistic. They become these like dark, shadowy creature things. Shiva seems to be part of some prophecy, but a large portion of the book is just kind of the two of them being away from all of that and kind of trying to work through what's been going on. I'm only on, I think, book 6 of 9 or something, and I don't think that the series is done yet. So I'm trying to like savor and enjoy my time with it. But the visual language of the book is just really captivating, grabbed me just from a store shelf and led me to pick it up. So that's another one that I definitely encourage you all to check out. But let's talk about the other thing that ruined my eyes this year outside of reading my Kindle a little too bright at night, you know, when I should have been sleeping. And that was the games that I played. And of all the Vigi games I played a shit ton of Hades. This is one that I initially was like, I'm gonna stay away from it because it's a roguelike, and roguelike games can pull me in. I've sunk too many hours into Dead Cells, but I'm never gonna beat that. Whereas Hades was attainable. In fact, I sank 380 hours into that game, completed it, like got all the darkness, maxed out everything, and then went back and started a hell mode run. The gameplay loop is so addictive and satisfying. And on top of that, and I'm not someone who normally gets kind of pulled into a narrative, but I really did feel like I was drawn to all of these different characters. And I was so thoroughly floored that I'd be hundreds of hours into the game and still be encountering completely new bits of dialogue and interactions, and character relationships would be expanding and building out in really fun ways. The combat is very engrossing, even though like the enemy design, truth be told, is fairly simplistic. It actually prompted me to then go back and play the previous Supergiant games, none of which I had played. I played through Bastion, which was fine, and then I played Transistor and went, oh my god, am I now going to have 2 Supergiant games in like my top 10? Because Transistor is also incredible in terms of its design. Transistor, if you haven't played it, your moves have chunks, and those moves can be modified in different ways, where a move can both be an active move, an enhancer move, or a passive. So you can plug them in into different slots, and it immediately changes up the way that you play, and then they obviously create a really fun dynamic that will prompt certain elements or aspects to not work in certain conditions. So it's really fun and inventive in terms of its combat, and the narrative and the world is also gorgeous. The visuals, the sound design. Supergiant Games just understands what the hell they're doing when they're making games, and my hat's off to them for doing such a phenomenal job on both Hades and Transistor. I still need to play Pyre. I'll get around to it. But the other game that I sank a ton of time into was I played the entire BioShock trilogy. I'd never played BioShock, any of them, and I somehow managed to avoid all of the spoilers, which made my playthrough of all 3 really interesting and very engaging. And this is probably going to be the hot take of the video. BioShock 2 is the best, in my opinion. I felt that narratively it was the most interesting. I felt that the things that they managed to do in filling out the world was really cool. And also the DLC of Minerva's Den managed to once again be super reinvesting in part of the world of Rapture that you hadn't seen, expanded out in a really fun way, while still bringing a bunch of new ideas to the table, and thematically exploring some like new nooks and crannies. I still enjoyed BioShock and BioShock Infinite a fair amount, but I felt that the, I guess, what I'll call hat tricks of the series just felt like tricks. as opposed to earned moments. I'm trying to not speak spoilers to any of that, but I am so curious if BioShock will continue, where it will continue, because Infinite definitely leaves a lot of doors or lighthouses open. But yeah, those were the big games that I played. In addition to, and this ties right into the next and final little personal note of, I played a ton of indie games, because you may not know this, I work for Gerard the Completionist, and for the past 4 years, we've been putting on this charity event called Indie Land. I worked previously with Scare to Care. We raised money for Camp Kesseman. We played horror games. I took that skill set to TOVG to build out Indie Land, which is we're playing indie games and raising money for dementia research, because, truth be told, YouTube doesn't support indie games unless it's like Five Nights at Freddy's or Among Us, like the most popular things. Just algorithmically, it's not that rewarding for a channel. But Gerard and myself, we love indies, and we play a ton of them. And so Indie Land serves as this great opportunity for us to raise money for dementia research, which is something that is near to me, but particularly dear to Gerard, my boss, and his brother Jacques, because their mother was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. And so they started a 501c3 to raise money for research and, support for that fight. So over the past 3 years, really, I've been getting to know a lot more of the indie scene, courtesy of events like E3 or our friend Bannon Rudis, who is over at Way Forward. He put on like a virtual indie showcase a couple of years back, so I met up with a ton of different indie developers. And last year, when the pandemic happened, we realized that, we can use Discord to actually pipe all of the developers virtually to us. So when we're playing early builds of their games, we can be talking to them directly. So last year we had 35 developers join us. This year we had 62, which was, yes, a time zone Tetris nightmare, but it's one that I honestly love. Getting to speak with the developers of Renane and Grotto and so many others about what they're working on, struggling with, showcasing. It's so exciting that games like Gestalt, games like Berserk Boy, that we've had multiple conversations with before. Some of these games you've probably never heard of, but you absolutely should check them out. They are all bangers. It's so cool to be developing relationships with this scene that I really care about, because people just pour so much time into that space. So with this fourth Indie Land, we actually, I think, crossed the $500,000 threshold of money raised, which is really quite huge. So yeah, that's been my 2021, largely in media, a little personal stuff that I need to remind myself happened, because yeah, 2021's been pretty bleak in a lot of ways. It sucks that we haven't been able to see one another as much. It sucks that, family and friends need to sequester themselves. I miss playing board games with more people. I miss just going to the movies in a more real sense. I've made it to the movies a few times, but I'm always finding super late nights to enjoy that, but not hearing a crowd cheer or a collective laugh really, really sucks. So yeah, that's my 2021 in review. Let me know some highlights for you. Be they personal victories, be they a movie you loved, a book you read, a game you played, a TV show that you thoroughly enjoyed. I'd love to know in the comments down below. Oh, also, yeah, in case you were curious, Indie Land is why my hair is like that. Well, the grow out is just quarantine. But yeah, this they got to dye my hair blue. I don't know how. And apparently blue turns me into a Hasidic merman when it goes this way. So yeah, I guess I'll end it with what if 2022 were good? Really good. Don't read into that. I'm not doing a what if. I'm just hoping that things, you get it. Whatever.